Right. So thanks to everyone and my fellow speakers. My name is Ciara Aucoin, and yes, I'm a second-year student at Ulster University. So my PhD research is on public order policing in transitional states. Now, some of the key concepts that I use and the meanings behind them, public order policing is that, of course, that form of policing that responds to protest and demonstration. That's both your typical protesting of social movements, but also demonstration with a political message or any types of commemorative or political or contentious purpose. I'm very much interested in the tactical and strategic approaches that police take, be it any area from use of barricades, use of force weapons, verbal commands, arrests, the whole suite of options available to officers during that in control of those incidents or response to those incidents. Because of that, the literature on public order policing is usually situated within the criminological and sociological perspective. While moving into the next block of my work, kind of on transitional states, which I'm interested in those that are going from conflict to political settlement rather than through processes of democratization. I'm firmly using transitional here as post-conflict and fragile states. And with this, I'm really quite interested in institutional reform, how transitional objectives are operationalized into institutions. And so with that, it has quite a political science and a legal perspective. So that's just to say that my work is really quite multidisciplinary. Now, what am I interested in with public order policing and transition? Well, as you probably know, and is definitely quite topical in the news at the moment, public order policing is often typified into different styles and approaches. They can be described as lenient or brutal, tolerant or repressive. And there's been kind of a general exception or a general evolution in these kind of styles away from brute uses of force in the 1960s and in response to civil rights protests towards more of a negotiated management style. In latter years, towards more use of surveillance technology, and then what is now being called strategic facilitation, which is an elaborated form of negotiation. The theory and the real motivation driving these kind of broad sweeping moves away from use of force as the dominant police response is that it was found over time that policing with force actually triggers more protest and can escalate tensions, challenging police claims of legitimacy. And of course, we see many examples of that from current Black Lives Matter protests around the world and how different states and jurisdictions are responding. Now, my interest is firmly in the post-conflict setting, and I'm interested in this public order policing in this context because challenges to police legitimacy and intensification of protests can really threaten the fragile peace. Yet, considering this, how states respond to protest and demonstration in transitional states is really under-examined. The theory is firmly rooted in democratized states and in largely Western states. Now, this is ironic considering that policing is a fundamental component of transitional justice, given that policing and state security, very often POP specifically, is a major grievance of the conflict and a primary focus in citizens' demands for reform. You can look to examples from El Salvador, Northern Ireland, of course, South Africa, and Bosnia. Now, so my question of my work is, what explains the tactical and strategic evolution in POP style in transitional states? What are the main influences on POP and changes in POP style from one direction to another? Now, looking at the theoretical work on this already, existing theory holds that POP is explained by kind of three broad layers of influence. At the micro-situational level, you have the size of the protest, the demonstration, their use of tactics, and kind of what's called the dynamic interaction between police and protesters. At the meso-organizational level, you really have the police organizational body, and that is their whole suite of policies and procedures, the tactical options available to them, and of course this kind of very vague term of police culture, which is interesting considering Schieffer's presentation. Culture here with police is often talked about and debated, whether or not there is this kind of continuous thread across jurisdictions with policing, the likes we hear of, machismo, fraternity, these kind of ideas of protectionist cultures, and how this kind of plays out in public order policing. And then there's this macro and political legal context, which is concerns your suite of laws protecting protesters, public space, human rights legislation, the ambiguity in all of these, and of course the political power configuration. This would be the whole theoretical kind of investigation into influences, political influences, interference in political processes into public order policing, the likes of separation between military, policing. This is all part of this kind of macro level. And largely the theory is quite disjointed across these three bodies. You'll have a lot of focus on, I would argue, the micro and the macro level. And then they're quite disjointed between them. There's not a lot of theory on how they work together to produce outcomes on the street. And the theory is kind of loosely put together that change in public order policing is a function of these three layers, social and historical interaction. Yet, as I said, there's a lack of theory on how they interact and which are more influential than others. There's essentially no established mechanism to study this. And considering this backdrop, what my research really turns to is this kind of very complex transitional state and context for public order policing. Some of the key features that I find are quite relevant for the study of public order policing and that pose quite a few questions to this kind of established literature is that transitional states post-conflict are really forward and backward looking. This emphasis on repair and healing that we've heard about from the other presentations. I really like Rudy Titel's saying here that the imperative of normative discontinuity, really emphasizing that states to move forward have to make this clean break with the past. And with that, the institutional reform that comes with it, the re-legitimization processes that this is supposed to embody, you really see a turn of state towards increased human rights, greater transparency, and creation of new architecture and reformed institutions. You also have ethnically or otherwise divided communities, socioeconomically or geographically. And of course, you have strong street level and community mobilization, both for and against the political settlement or peace, so-called peacemakers and spoilers. Now, all of these give quite a unique dynamic that the pop literature to date hasn't really addressed or situated. So with that, my work is really hoping to build a comprehensive model to understand pop and its evolution in the transitional context. I want to place a strong emphasis on the key actors, the nodes of influence, the critical junctures that changed pop approaches. This will really speak to kind of the interaction between policy level changes at the organizational level and influences that may have come from both the top level at the state or macro level and from the community to kind of see this interaction and really place power in the different hands of where it exists. And with that, I really want to situate pop in the debate on post-conflict transition, particularly the discussion around the state-society relationship and that kind of transition and healing and processes of state legitimization. And I hope that in this work, there'll be lessons about reforming public order police practice for more established or so-called stable democracies, which we see grapple with similar issues. So without that, without further ado, I will wrap up there and I look forward to comments and questions. Thanks very much.